Print servers in federal environments create risk and unnecessary complexity. Every new printer, location, or policy adds strain to infrastructure that was never built for today's demands. FedRAMP High Authorized Printer Logic eliminates print servers with a secure cloud-native, zero-trust solution designed for federal IT. With advanced security, centralized control, and simplified management, agencies can modernize print without added burden. See what secure serverless printing looks like. Visit Vasion.com to learn more.
Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Friday, August 21st. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, a surprising source is helping uncover compromised government websites. Plus, the Pentagon is looking for a clearer picture of how data moves among allies and mission partners. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. There are a lot of opinions about how the Pentagon could improve the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification program. But most organizations agree the Defense Department could do a much better job marking controlled unclassified information itself. They say CUI marking continues to be a critical problem, driving CMMC costs and confusion. Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me now with more insight. Justin, thanks for being here.
Hey, Terry, thanks for having me.
This is a really interesting point of conflict in the whole CMMC discussion. How might the CUI issue factor into the Pentagon's ongoing review of the CMMC program?
Yeah, if you read the comments that are pouring into the CMMC Reform Task Force, this CUI issue is kind of right at the top of a common challenge for this whole program. And all of these comments are, of course, being filed as part of this 90-day review where the Pentagon is looking to kind of drive down costs and simplify what DoD Chief Information Officer Kirsten Davies and other officials say has become too complex and too compliance-focused of a program. But if you read, comments from the SBA, Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy, a CUI issue and the Pentagon's use or treatment of CUI is the most frequently cited concern for small businesses when it comes to CMMC. The Office of Advocacy wrote to the task force that this uncertainty is leading to essentially contractors considering everything that they might get from the government CUI, and that builds into the cost of complying with CMMC, which is intended to protect or verify protection of CUI. The National Defense Industrial Association also highlighted this issue. The Professional Services Council highlighted this issue. So this is being cited by organizations that represent big contractors, small contractors, and everyone in between to the CMMC task force.
Say more about the practical implications of that inconsistent CUI marking practice. How do they really drive CMMC costs?
Sure. So CMMC is really intended to verify whether contractors are meeting cybersecurity requirements for protecting CUI. And so when CUI is shared as part of a contract, then that contractor is supposed to protect it in line with those cyber standards that CMMC verifies. And so they have to pay to, of course, architect their environments in line with those cybersecurity standards. They have to pay for those environments and their IT systems and everything to be certified under CMMC. That's costly. It runs into the tens of thousands of dollars for a certification and even more for, paying for cybersecurity services that meet the standards. And so if the Pentagon or contracting officers are flowing down CUI that isn't actually CUI, is kind of considering everything CUI, then contractors and subcontractors in particular might be paying for a certification and for cybersecurity protections that they don't really need. And that's, of course, at the heart of driving costs within CMMC.
The Pentagon has been notoriously bad at marking classified documents for as far back as I can remember. How are you tracking how far back this particular issue with CUI identification goes?
Yeah, I spoke to some people who have been following this. They pointed to, 2010 and the creation of the government-wide CUI program, which ironically was created to standardize and simplify how the government labels and protects sensitive information that isn't classified. But you start to look at how its program has been implemented. The National Archives and Records Administration lists more than 100 types of CUI, ranging from defense-controlled technical information, which is often what we're focused on when it comes to CMMC, but then it also covers things like archaeological information, federal taxpayer information, and a whole range of other categories and subcategories. And what it really comes down to is that there doesn't seem to be kind of a central authority for determining what isn't CUI. And so it is up to program officials and contracting officials to figure that out and then put those requirements in contracts. And there's a lot of there's a lot of differences in just how that's treated across different contracts. And some of these industry associations have said there's been wild swings in what is and isn't considered CUI from contract to contract.
It's always felt like the Pentagon paid no penalty for over-classifying or over-constraining the handling of these documents. As organizations are recommending their changes, what are they suggesting that the Pentagon do to address the CUI marking challenges?
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned there's no penalty for overmarking. They often err on the side of caution, and they figure that if they overmark it, they can't be punished for undermarking anything that might be sensitive and not have been protected properly. And so there's some incentive perversion there. So what some of these organizations are recommending is just a really increased focus on this issue at the highest levels of the Pentagon. And then, focusing on training for contracting officers, focusing on, really addressing how CUI is interpreted at the contract level, and then even at the prime contractor level. Oftentimes prime contractors take the same type of conservative approach and just push down increased cybersecurity standards to all of their subcontractors, regardless of whether they're going to touch CUI or not. So it's really this combination of training, of increased focus on, what is and what isn't CUI. And then, I noted the Associated Builders and Contractors Association pointed to the need to have some nuance in how they treat CUI access. There might be some contractors that just need to have view-only access of CUI, perhaps within an IT enclave that is controlled by a prime contractor. Versus a subcontractor who needs to, take on board some sensitive technical data package into their own systems. And they, of course, would be treated kind of under that CMMC certification process. That's really what it's aimed at. But there are differences in how perhaps the Pentagon could look at how they view contractors and what kind of access they need to different types of data.
Well, it sounds like the Pentagon is certainly getting a lot of feedback as they go through this 90-day review. What are the next stages in that review process?
Yep, the RFI closed on Friday of last week, and so the the Reform Task Force is now going to be looking at all of the different responses that they've received and coming up with some recommendations. They've also been doing roundtables. And so those recommendations are due out in mid-September, and DoD Chief Information Officer Kirsten Davies had said that probably a couple weeks after the task force sends her recommendations, they will put out a public report that kind of summarizes what they found and what they want to do going forward. So there's a lot going on with the CMMC review, a lot in terms of how they want to improve the certification process itself. But it'll be interesting to see how they look at this core CUI issue and how it really affects the program as a whole and what they look to do to improve it.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for the update.
Thank you.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, a surprising source is helping uncover compromised government websites. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Federal agencies work hard to secure their online presence, but some website compromises are being uncovered through an unlikely source. Federal News Network's Eric White spoke with Greg Pollock, Director of Research and Insights at UpGuard, about what those discoveries reveal about the challenge of keeping track of sprawling government web infrastructure.
So, with an emphasis on NSFW, this is a vulnerability pertaining to .edu and .gov domains that you seem to have discovered that there's a little bit of, it was something that wasn't necessarily they had on their radar, but it seems as if OnlyFans takedowns are helping .gov and .edu domains protect themselves a little more. Why don't we just start from the beginning on what exactly you were looking for and how you found out about this?
Sure. I was, conducting a kind of routine investigation of a website that had other indicators of compromise. And as part of that process, I go to Google, I just search across that site to see what's going on with this thing. At the bottom of that page, at the bottom of the search results, I see a little notice that I had never seen before, which said some results have been omitted because of DMCA notices, against the content. So I click through, and there I see a DMCA takedown notice from clearly an adult content creator sent to mostly adult content piracy sites, but also this government domain that I was looking at. And I thought, well, that's pretty weird. What's going on there? And so pulling on that thread led me to discover how this is happening across lots of domains and how those DMCA copyright notices can be a pretty effective way to look for domains that are somehow advertising search results they don't mean to.
And when you say they are advertising, so when they compromise, they are essentially piggybacking on a government website that would pop up in a normal search for a government website or for a government resource or university resource. But all of a sudden, going down the search results, you see a title that you weren't searching for, let's say.
Yeah, exactly. This is sometimes called parasite SEO. And it's a way for attackers to get traffic to their sites by finding websites that have some kind of vulnerability that allows them to start getting, the names of their sites or even, links to their sites, into search results. And they especially target these higher ed and government sites because those are trusted sites that Google says, hey, this is a really trusted site. I want to put this high up in the search ranks. And so that's one of the many factors that's combining here to make this an especially juicy target for these attackers.
Gotcha. All right. And so, what does it say that OnlyFans has now become a kind of early indicator for a vulnerability that would be on a site that Google has up there because it is so highly trusted? And are the powers that be who run those websites and control those websites, are they actually utilizing it? Did you hear anything on that front?
Oh, are they utilizing this detection method?
Yeah. I mean, Are they, saying, hey, this is obviously showing a problem here that we have to address?
I don't think anyone is approaching it this way. And actually, part of that is because as I was doing this research, I found that this intersection of the copyright notices and the government sites is really fairly new. I mean, this is really taken off in the last 5 years, that you can use these data sets in this way. That said, I mean, this kind of problem of attackers compromising those sites to piggyback and have parasite SEO, that's been going on for a long time. I think what we can do with this is really shorten the window of detection because eventually someone's going to see it and tell them, right? Like it really stands out like a sore thumb when you see that. So eventually someone does see it who will report it, but it usually takes quite a long time. And you can find some that have been up for ages, but you also find organizations that are better at detecting it. This might be a faster way to do that.
Gotcha. All right. And so if the copyrights, detection by copyright enforcement ecosystem, is that an overall better way that might be available to finding these vulnerabilities rather than something that is just waiting in the dark that you never hear of and until, you see compromised information on the dark web or, whatever have you?
Well, I mean, really, what the attackers are taking advantage of here are just the organizational complexity of governments and universities that operate really large digital infrastructure over really long periods of time. And that organizational complexity leads to unmaintained websites, which creates this kind of low-hanging fruit. And so the best option is just for these teams, which are always resource constrained and always asked to do more with less, for them to have enough people and the right tools to be able to take care of those sites proactively. this kind of like after the fact detection method, and like you were saying, dark web detection, that's even further down the chain. You really want to catch it sooner by giving them the tools to understand their own infrastructure ahead of time.
We're speaking with Greg Pollock. He is the Director of Research and Insights at UpGuard. And was there anything that you came across? Obviously, it's kind of surprising when you come across this stuff when you're searching for a government website. But in your research and seeing all of these DMCA takedown requests, was there anything that stuck out to you and kind of challenged what you were originally assuming that, hey, this stuff is gonna happen? But was there something else at play here that you didn't think you would see?
I mean, I'll tell you the biggest surprise was just how recent this phenomenon is. That when I had got my data together and then created my charts, it's really in the last 5 years that the chart starts to take off, where you see this intersection of the copyright notices and the government and education websites. If I had done this project 3 years ago, the results would have been really pretty unremarkable, and we wouldn't be talking today. But it's really a convergence of two things. One, the increase in cyber crimes, especially targeting Americans, and the increase in the number of individual copyright owners creating adult content. And so those two things have created this convergence. And it's really a surprise when you stumble into something big that no one has discovered and you think this is actually a new thing that's pretty important.
Yeah, I imagine that they're not doing this to try and amplify any particular content. There is some means to sort of game the system of using that content to get access to other people's information, right? They're not just doing this out of the goodness of their hearts to help their local OnlyFans creator.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, so these cyber criminal organizations are really complex and operate really technically impressive infrastructure themselves. And the top of the funnel, I mean, you can think of it like a business. The top of the funnel is they're trying to get users into their system. And where do you get users to visit your website? Well, through Google search results. So this whole thing is, and what do people search for? What do people want? And also, what do people want to pirate? Well, if there is paid adult content that someone is offering you for free, that becomes a pretty good lure, and also for a certain audience who maybe is less risk averse, let's say, and maybe ultimately like a good target for your financial exploitation scams.
Gotcha. All right. And any other conclusions that you came away with in how this kind of stuff can be stymied out even more, and security teams could adopt any sort of methods to be on the lookout for it, other than seeing a nefarious website pop up whenever they search their team's name?
Yeah, I mean, I think the lesson here is really not that defenders are doing a bad job or that they don't know about this. This is really a cybersecurity fundamental question, and the people tasked with defending these websites are aware that they want to have an inventory of their websites. They want to know what software it's running. It's really the resource constraints on those teams. And so this project, which, as we talked about, it's kind of a funny juxtaposition of like these serious websites and this unusual content. This is really a way to get the interest of everyone else around them to say, hey, these teams are trying to defend your websites. They need more resources to do it, and to shine a light on those cybersecurity fundamentals that, unlike the OnlyFans models, they don't always get the attention they deserve.
Yeah, and it kind of shows, and I know this is kind of outside the parameters of what you were looking at, but I mean, is there any other industry that faces more copyright infringements than the adult entertainment industry? Because, obviously their stuff is being infiltrated all of the time. Is there anything that they might be able to do to kind of put a stop to this thing on the front end and protect themselves?
Yeah, we talked with a successful OnlyFans content creator about, how much of a problem is this? And she said, yeah, if you don't have some kind of brand protection software doing this for you, then you might as well not even try, because piracy is so rife in that industry. There are other industries that face it as well. In looking through the DMCA notices, that I wanted to filter out everything that wasn't adult content just to kind of tighten the analysis here. And so you see a lot of piracy of sports streams. You see a lot of DMCA notices also related to illegal gambling sites. So those are some of the other forces at work in our digital ecosystem where people want certain kinds of content, adult content, sports streams, etc. attackers are well aware of the demand for that and are going to use it to try to get eyeballs onto their sites and away from legitimate sites.
Utilizing DMCA notices as a snapshot of what folks are really into.
Yeah, I mean, you maybe know intuitively what are people interested in, but it really puts the rubber meets the road at like what are they willing to pirate.
Greg Pollack is the Director of Research and Insights at UpGuard, speaking there with Federal News Network's Eric White. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, the government is taking a closer look at who is really performing work under small business contracts. But first, the Pentagon is looking for a clearer picture of how data moves among allies and mission partners. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Sharing information is one thing. Understanding where data is, who can access it, and how it moves is another. As the Defense Information Systems Agency takes over the mission partner environment, it's shifting the focus from networks to data. For more on how DISA is doing that, Federal News Network's executive editor Jason Miller took part in a recent press briefing with Nick Creswell, the portfolio acquisition executive for the mission partner environment at DISA.
The Air Force has been at this for quite a while. I believe they've had it for a little over 5 years now at this point. So there's a lot of good work that they have started and is in progress that we don't want to fail. There's a lot of no-fail mission in the space that we're currently operating in. So as we move those things over, we're doing very deliberately. We're moving the work, and then we're actively talking some of the functional transition as well. So we are actively starting to move some of the individuals along with the resourcing now under the purview of the PAE. For us to continue not only the operations that we have in the environment today, what we call the extant portfolio, but then also how do we start to accelerate toward transformation and really start to align around the key activities that have been thought about or were started that now we're starting to shape under the purview of the agency and then ultimately as part of our portfolio.
I then followed up by asking him for an example of some of the capabilities that are being transitioned to DISA from the Air Force.
Without going into too many specifics, obviously, but there are some NATO capabilities that they had started that are underway that need to continue to persist, align very well with some of our capability development activity, our major programs. So as they have started to get the ball down that field, down to, I'd say, the 50-yard line at least. I'll take it just a couple yards further. We want to be able to pick that up and continue to run as quickly as possible while looking to align with what we're cohering is that overall enterprise system.
I asked Creswell about the tech incubator and accelerator DISA is setting up as part of the MPE.
Because we're the integration of integration PAEs, so we have an opportunity to look, as I said in the panel, kind of uniquely at industry and look at some of the non-traditional kinds of technologies that maybe the other big PAEs aren't able to, or just not quite that fit. So as we look at the accelerator, we're really looking for the best breed of what industry has to offer us. We're trying to build that in a way that allows them to do development in a purposeful way, while at the same time, kind of exploring new things that might be made available to us. So, there's going to be a lot more information that's going to be coming forward. We're trying to repurpose some of our existing capability that's been brought over from the Air Force. The Air Force had started some of this. To use your football analogy again, they only got a few yards off the goal line, but we're really going to start looking to make it something that we can make. It's going to be useful for us, right?
I then followed up with two broad-based questions. Is there a timeline of when DISA would like to get this accelerator set up by? And then when will you put out a call from industry, or will industry bring you ideas? Then I asked Creswell how this tech incubator accelerator will work.
I am impatient. I drive my people nuts. We're small but mighty right now. We're growing very quickly. You'd asked about moving folks over. We're I think going to quadruple in size within a few months. So that's going to be a kind of a big thing. It's kind of a combination of both. Whenever you really look at it, it's an opportunity for industry to be able to bring us their ideas via some partnership that we are putting in place, some public-private partnership. So there's an opportunity to have unsolicited ideas and capabilities brought in. And then we will also be doing industry engagement and outreach, which then will ask industry to come and participate with us to be able to show us, again, be able to demonstrate what they are describing. We are trying to move beyond the PowerPoint. We are moving beyond the just words and the briefings. This is really about how do we put functionally relevant capability into an environment and be able to demonstrate how it's going to perform in our technical baseline.
I asked Cresswell about the timing of the launch of the incubator accelerator.
Yeah, sorry, I told you I was impatient. I was impatient as in it should have already been in place. It's a 26 initiative without a doubt. We're expecting it to come online here any day. In fact, we already have pieces and parts of it established. There are a few things that have to be finalized in order for us to actually go live, but I would say here in the fourth quarter of FY26, we're probably going to be making some announcements via our channels to let everyone know that it's ready for partners to come in and start working with this. And in some cases, sorry, Jason, in some cases they've already started doing that. We've already brought in some industry partners via the private-public partnership that particular facility offers us.
Another reporter asked, why did it make sense for DISA to take over the MPE?
That kind of gets after the transition a little bit. So from a just a capability perspective, when you step back and you look at what the agency does, the agency has a lot of enterprise level responsibility already across the DOEN. Mission partner environment, while it's always been kind of a unique space, it's really not that dissimilar from a technology perspective, an applied perspective, than other things that we do as a joint force. And from my perspective, I think that was a recognition within the CIO leadership at the time to say, hey, we have an enterprise service provider today that is already delivering these functionally relevant things to the combatant commanders and to our joint task force users. How do we take and enhance that? And how do we then add the coalition to our broader objectives whenever you start looking at combined all-domain operations?
The reporter then followed up by asking if other programs outside the Air Force are being moved into the MPE.
Yeah, so there was a capability called Sabre. I think this has been publicized quite a bit. The Air Force was developing Sabre. Sabre was actually the first thing to transition. That happened even before I was onboarded here in January. It was the first kind of concept. There were some capability areas that were then morphed into the demonstration article that was taken to Keen Edge earlier this year. We've since taken the pieces and parts of that and decomposed it into our capability, which is Coalition Information Environment. CIE is the new program that is being stood up for this. There are, as you can imagine, anything that is non-intelligence related that really is focused command and control, information collaboration capability sets that has been in the department. We're doing right now kind of a heavy lift of how do we bring those things in under the cognizance of the PAE.
The reporter then asked how DISA is working with the Joint Staff J6 on the mission partner environment.
This afternoon, Jason Martin mentioned there's going to be a panel. Jennifer Minks is actually a member of that panel. So we work incredibly well together. That's one of the benefits of coming from the CIO into this role. At that level and the department level, you're working day in, day out with your joint staff colleagues. So, we're just essentially continuing that relationship that we had built over time to include a lot of the strategy of what it is that we actually wanted to do. We're now translating that into real tangible things. So we're moving beyond concept into actual delivery.
Nick Creswell is the Portfolio Acquisition Executive for the Mission Partner Environment at the Defense Information Systems Agency, speaking at a press briefing held at the recent AFCEA TechNet Cyber Conference. You can hear more of his comments on federalnewsnetwork.com. Search Ask the CIO. Coming up next, the government is taking a closer look at who is really performing work under small business contracts. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Recent enforcement actions are giving contractors a clearer picture of what federal investigators are looking for in small business set-aside programs. Many of the cases turn on a simple question: who is actually controlling and performing the work? Here with insights is William Hart of Rogers Joseph O'Donnell. Will, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be with you.
You are following a couple of storylines that we touch here every once in a while. In the last few weeks, we've seen DOJ announce major False Claims Act settlements involving federal set-aside programs, and at the same time, SBA has announced changes to the administration of the 8A program. When you look at those two storylines separately, how do you connect the dots? What is happening in the 8A community?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that the administration has clearly targeted the 8A program as part of a broader push against diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And a number of cabinet members have made statements saying that the program is ripe for abuse and believe that it is rife with fraud. And this could be individuals or entities posing fraudulently as qualifying for the set-aside program, or it could be individuals and entities serving as mere conduits and pass-throughs for larger ineligible contractors. So I think what's going on here is every part of the government is coordinating with the Justice Department in order to target, identify, and ultimately investigate and potentially prosecute fraud among its 8A contractors.
Well, let's go back to those False Claim Act cases then. What were the underlying behaviors that got these contractors into trouble?
So in the most recent cases, it seems as though they've started with the service-disabled, veteran-owned small business programs. And there were two recent settlements, one out of the Middle District of Florida and the other out of the Northern District of New York, in which the local U.S. attorney's offices partnered with the relevant Office of Inspector Generals to focus on fraud with respect to those two individual companies. And what got the companies into trouble is that the so-called 8A contractor was really just a pass-through or a conduit, meaning they weren't actually doing the work, nor were they actually in control. And so with that being so blatant and out in the open, it made it a pretty easy win for the government in both cases. And as a result, both resulted in settlements.
That issue of control seems to be coming up more and more. How does the government determine whether a small business is actually controlling the work or just serving as the pass-through for someone else? What do they look for?
They're looking for actual operational management capacity. So they're looking for, is the small business 8A eligible entity actually making managerial decisions? Are they actually doing work and billing to the contract? Or are they merely just simply forwarding emails along, for example, to a broader entity behind the scenes that would not actually be eligible for the 8A contract in the first place? But they're looking for what is the lived reality on the ground, not what the corporate structure might otherwise suggest.
And are these cases coming up because the government is doing 100% review of the files, or are there whistleblowers, or how do these cases come to the attention of the Department of Justice?
So it can happen in a number of different contexts. As your listeners almost certainly know, the False Claims Act has a qui tam provision. No one actually knows how to pronounce the Latin phrase, but I go with qui tam. You can ask 100 different FCA practitioners. You might get 100 different responses. But that is one of them. And obviously, there are strong financial incentives for so-called relators to bring these cases if they're successfully adopted and taken on by the government. So that's one way in which it could come up, and that's how it came up in the Northern District of New York. Separate and apart from it is something we should probably spend a little bit of time on, which are audits that are being conducted at the agency level of their 8A contractors and their 8A programs. And I think that's what we're going to see more and more of. So last June, Administrator Kelly Loeffler had a big splashy announcement that they were going to do a wholesale audit of the SBA 8A program in an effort to root out what they viewed as pass-through fraud. That is, 8A contractors merely acting as straw men or straw contractors for larger contractors. And so as a result, we've already seen a little bit of movement in that. We have seen, as the SBA has announced earlier this year, that they are decertifying certain entities that didn't comply with parts of the audit. And independent of that, Secretary of War Peter Hegseth has announced a Department of War audit of 8A contractors, and again has alleged in the press clippings that the program is rife with fraud and that taxpayer money is being wasted and not steered toward small businesses, but rather large defense contractors. So again, we're talking about a year or so timeline. I think it's not inconceivable that these audits will start to bear fruit in the form of prosecutions or investigations by the department.
Will Hart is of counsel with Rogers Joseph O'Donnell. So Will, you're talking here about a pretty significant step up in enforcement activities by the federal government. At the same time, has there been sort of an increasing risk behavior on the part of small business contractors? Are they setting themselves up to be caught in these audits?
Well, potentially. I think for a long period of time, only the most egregious cases were prosecuted, or at the very least, civilly investigated and then ultimately settled. And it takes a lot of investment to actually prove that an 8A was just a pass-through or a straw man in the contractual arrangement. So with the lack of actual resources devoted to these cases, perhaps some complacency did set in. You know, and your listeners almost certainly know, it is not out of the norm for large contractors to work with 8As to get access to sole source contracts and other set-asides, as long as the arrangements comply with the regulations. That is totally permissible. But as we've kind of been talking about, it's a sliding scale, and we look at the facts on the ground as they are in terms of who has control in the arrangement. And so I think it's easy for these arrangements to be set up with the best of intentions, but unfortunately, it begins to fall to the point where the larger subcontractors is exercising more control than was originally contemplated.
As we're looking at this period of increased enforcement and examination by the federal government, if you were advising an 8A firm now and they were checking to see whether they might be vulnerable, what would you want them to start looking at?
Well, first, we would look at corporate structure and how one entity is actually doing the contracting itself. Second, we would look at the relationship with our subcontractor and what's spelled out in either the teaming agreement or the subcontract. Third, we would want to look at the division of labor and how labor is parceled out between the contractor, i.e. the 8A entity, and the subcontractor. And then we would want to look into the financial arrangements in terms of how much each side is getting out of the federal contract itself. So we would start with those four principles to ensure that both contractor and the subcontractor were in compliance.
It seems like the risk here is predominantly on the 8A firm, but are there risks that might accrue to their larger subcontracting partner as the audit manifests?
Absolutely. And you anticipated the very next thing I was going to say, which is there are any number of theories of liability that could have the larger subcontractor that's not 8A eligible wind up in legal hot water. The first is that they would have aided and abetted the the contractor in obtaining the sole source or set aside under false pretenses. You could also make out a case that they conspired with the 8A contractor to obtain something that they were not legally entitled to obtain in the form of a sole source contract. or they willfully caused the submission of false claims by the 8A contractor. So federal prosecutors and DOJ trial attorneys within the civil fraud division have no shortage of legal theories on which to go after the larger subcontractors behind the 8As.
So how does this all play out? A year or 2 years from now, are we going to have a lot fewer 8A firms in the market, or is everyone going to be in compliance with the new rules and it'll be fine? Where do you see it headed?
I think it's conceivable to have two things. The first is, I think, as has already happened with the SBA, some of these entities are being decertified as 8A eligible after choosing not to comply or failing the SBA audit. So that's something that I think could continue to happen as each agency is going through its roles of 8A contractors. The second thing is that government can make an example out of one of the more egregious offenders, whether it's the larger subcontractor or the 8A contractor itself. A large significant case with a high dollar value attached to it, followed by a lot of press attention and press releases, and potentially a large settlement, or if the facts warrant it, a criminal prosecution. They can actually prove intent and willfulness. But I do see an effort to have a large prosecution or a large civil settlement to act as a deterrent in the market.
William Hart is of counsel with Rogers Joseph O'Donnell. Will, I really appreciate you bringing this issue to us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is moving beyond just compliance to risk-based cybersecurity with a focus on continuous monitoring and attack surface management. It's a transition officials say is meant to make the agency's defensive posture more threat-informed. Keith Busby is the Chief Information Security Officer at CMS. He talked about the transition with Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday.
For an incredibly long time, cybersecurity in the government was a very compliance-driven activity. Right? And so I think we're really now seeing that transition away from compliance-driven activities to risk-driven activities, right? And trying to associate outcomes of a kind of threat-informed, risk-based defense into compliance activities, right? So that we don't have to send system teams through all these other check-the-box activities, more so going, hey, because we're making these decisions based off of this information and we're staying within these guardrails, we are inherently compliant. It's more of a kind of continuous monitoring, continuous reactive state. We're really leaning in towards a protect first, visibility second. With the creation of CDM, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, the focus for the last decade or so has been gaining additional visibility. And we're starting to make that transition from just having visibility, but using automated continuous reaction based off of that visibility.
Yeah, isn't it fair to say that those themes kind of punctuate your priorities as CISO at CMS? I mean, what specifically are you focused on here in 2026 in terms of moving forward your cybersecurity program?
Resilience. Resilience is still the main word that I use, right? It's not just going through and creating systems that applied security after the fact. It's building systems from secure by design, ensure that we're zero trust compliant, that we're using zero trust practices, and then with the goal of having more resilient systems to support our business programs, right? And that's why we all exist, right? We're here to support the business. We saw over recent years as healthcare attacks happened, having systems that were not designed with a resilient eye, how much it can impact the healthcare sector as a whole. While CMS has done well to maintain its functionality and its purpose in the healthcare sector, we have seen how large-scale attacks can disrupt large amounts of patients. And that's the ultimate goal, right? Is avoiding that.
Yeah, it's really concerning, obviously, consistently seeing healthcare at the top of like the ransomware target lists or successful attack lists that the FBI, I think, puts out, and other areas where healthcare systems and data are being attacked. What's your approach to, you mentioned visibility and how we're kind of shifting from visibility to more automated protections to take advantage of that visibility. So what's your approach to, I guess, better understanding and managing that attack surface that CMS is responsible for?
For a long time, we would ask our system teams to provide to us their authorization boundaries, right? A documented thing that shows all the assets that we're protecting. But the industry as a whole has had to shift away from that. And while it's still required for some compliance needs, we've had to move into a continuous attack surface management, right? So what are we scanning? What do we see showing up that's associated with CMS? And I think we've done a really good job of not just doing that continuous monitoring from the edge, but also layering in like external researchers. So we have an active bug bounty program that's through CISA's bug crowd offering, right? And we use that to have public researchers across the globe come after us and tell us where they see issues from our public facing attack surface.
I think CMS has about 6,000 employees, but many more contractors and kind of third parties that it interacts with that might handle CMS data, do work on behalf of CMS. How do you think about endpoint management within that context and how you're kind of protecting the data and protecting the mission?
So data first is our first principle, right? Protection of the data first. Where we are kind of going with this is our data should not leave our environments. And so when you talk about third parties, we need to really minimize the amount of times we are sharing or sending our data, our functions off networks that we have visibility into, off that assets that we have visibility into, off our ability to be able to implement controls around protecting those assets. And so that is the direction that we are heading. We are trying to pull all of those things back internal to CMS to ensure to still have everyone be able to do their mission, but come to us to do it.
And as far as you mentioned zero trust, I think this is a journey that federal agencies have been on officially for about 5 years under that initial zero trust strategy. And all along, folks have said this is not. There's no destination. It's a journey. It's a continuous kind of evolution. What about CMS? How far have you come, and what are some of the challenges or opportunities that you see for that journey going forward?
So I will say we've made zero trust, as I should start there. Zero trust as a philosophy is shifting the focus from kind of the perimeter edge to the user-based controls, right? Continuous authentication and authorization as they move throughout the network. For a long time, it was once you've proven that you belong in the network, you're free to move throughout. I think we've done a really good job around layering in zero trust controls around the user. So requiring FIDO2 or token-based multi-factor authentication, moving away from the one-time passwords, and having all of our users with privileged access be required to use MFA. That's an area that we have grown tremendously over the last few years. I think there's still work to be done between microsegmentation and what happens once you're in the environment, that continuous authorization kind of aspect. But we are growing there. We are moving forward with a larger enterprise identity and credential access management kind of program as a whole. That's our biggest area of focus right now. I'll also say, lots of things get thrown into zero trust. Right? And you talk about microsegmentation and all. These are all practices that have been around much longer than 5 years, that the industry as a whole has been rolling out for decades. MFA has been around for an incredibly long time. All of these things are practices that are still general expected security cyber requirements of folks It's just now we are cataloging them under a specific program name and using that to push it. There's no such thing as zero trust in a box. Right? It's all about different philosophies, different programs, different protection mechanisms coming together to work together.
That's Keith Busby, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Find his full discussion with Justin Doubleday at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.